I became useful before I became myself. That's the part people don't usually talk about, how easily usefulness can replace identity if you let it. How quickly you can be needed without ever being known. I learned early that being helpful made me valuable. That solving problems earned approval. That staying strong kept things from falling apart. So I did all of it. Quietly. Reliably. Without complaint. And for a long time, it worked. People leaned on me. Trusted me. Expected me to be there. I became the one who handled things when others couldn't. The one who stayed calm. The one who didn't ask for much in return. I told myself this was maturity. What it really was disappearance with applause. Somewhere along the way, my life stopped being something I experienced and became something I managed. I measured my days by how many people I helped, how many problems I prevented, how many disappointments I absorbed before they reached anyone else. I rarely asked myself how I felt. Not because I didn't care, but because the answer always felt inconvenient. There was always someone else who needed more. Someone whose pain felt louder, clearer, easier to justify. So I postponed myself indefinitely, convinced that one day, when things settled, I'd return to whatever parts of me I had set aside. I didn't realize I was setting them aside permanently. The exhaustion came slowly. Not physical. Emotional. A kind of tiredness that doesn't respond to rest because it isn't caused by effort, it's caused by absence. By living too long without being addressed directly. At night, when everything was finally quiet, I felt a strange emptiness I couldn't explain. Not sadness. Not anger. Just the sense that something essential was missing, like a room in my life I never entered and now couldn't find the door to. People described me as selfless. I never corrected them. Because admitting the truth would have required me to say something I wasn't ready to face, that I didn't know who I was without being needed. That scared me. If I stopped being useful, what would be left? So I stayed in motion. Stayed involved. Stayed available. I filled every silence with responsibility. Every doubt with obligation. Every moment of discomfort with another task for someone else. And the world rewarded me for it. That's the cruel part. No one warns you when you're erasing yourself in a socially acceptable way. The first real crack came during a moment that should have felt meaningful. Someone thanked me sincerely for always being there. For never asking for anything. For being so easy to rely on. I smiled. And felt absolutely nothing. No warmth. No pride. No connection. Just a hollow realization that their gratitude was directed at a version of me I had constructed for their convenience. That was the moment I understood something I had been avoiding for years. I had become essential to everyone else, and optional to myself. I didn't collapse after that realization. I didn't change anything right away. I simply carried the awareness with me like a quiet weight that made every familiar routine feel slightly wrong. I started noticing how often my first instinct was to say yes before I even knew what was being asked. How quickly I dismissed my own discomfort by reminding myself that others had it worse. How rarely anyone asked what I wanted and how rarely I offered an answer even when they did. Because I didn't know anymore. That was the most frightening discovery of all. I had spent so long shaping myself around other people's needs that my own desires felt vague, distant, almost theoretical. Like something I used to have but couldn't quite remember how to access. And with that realization came a question that refused to leave me alone: if I stopped living for everyone else, would there be anything left of me? Once that question entered my life, it didn't leave quietly. It followed me everywhere, into conversations, into routine tasks, into the moments when I was supposed to feel satisfied. Every time I said yes automatically, every time I stepped in before anyone even asked, it echoed in the background: who is this for and what is it costing me? I started to notice something deeply uncomfortable about the way people relied on me. Not because they were cruel or demanding, most of them weren't, but because my reliability had trained them not to look too closely. They trusted that I would handle things, absorb things, smooth things over. And I had taught them to expect that. There was a moral trap hidden in that role. Helping others felt good. Necessary. Justifiable. It gave my life structure and meaning, or at least something that looked like meaning from the outside. How could something that helped people also be hurting me? That question paralyzed me. Because if being needed was harmful, then what did that say about the years I had spent defining myself by usefulness? Was I selfish for wanting more, ungrateful for feeling empty while others benefited from my presence? So I kept going. But something had shifted. The help no longer felt generous, it felt compulsory. Like a debt I had never agreed to but was expected to keep paying. Every request landed heavier than the last. Every thank you felt smaller. I began to feel resentment, not toward anyone in particular, but toward the life I had built by never setting boundaries. And resentment, when ignored, turns inward. I started withdrawing emotionally even while remaining physically present. I did what was expected, but without connection. I listened without hearing. I responded without engaging. On the surface, nothing changed, but inside, I was slowly detaching. That scared me more than exhaustion ever had. Because detachment is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It just removes you piece by piece while your body keeps showing up. The breaking point didn't come during a crisis. It came during a moment of honesty I didn't plan. Someone asked me genuinely, casually, what do you want right now? Not what do you need? Not what should you do? What do you want? My mind went blank. Not because I didn't want anything, but because I had trained myself not to check. Desire had become irrelevant information. Optional. Unsafe. I laughed it off. Changed the subject. But later, alone, the weight of that moment hit me. I didn't know my own wants. That realization was devastating. Because it meant I wasn't choosing to live for others anymore, I was doing it by default, without an alternative self to return to. I had outsourced my identity for so long that reclaiming it felt impossible. And yet, something inside me resisted giving up completely. A quiet anger surfaced, not explosive, not dramatic, but firm. The kind that comes from realizing you have been loyal to something that no longer deserves it. I began to understand that my selflessness wasn't purely kindness. It was also avoidance. Avoidance of conflict. Avoidance of disappointing people. Avoidance of asking myself questions I didn't know how to answer. As long as I was needed, I didn't have to define myself. That was the ethical dilemma at the heart of everything. Was I helping others out of care or out of fear of existing without a role? And if it was the second, what did that make all my sacrifices worth? I didn't have answers yet. Only discomfort. Only awareness. But awareness has momentum. It pushes you toward a decision whether you're ready or not. Because once you see that giving everything to others can also be a way of abandoning yourself, you can't keep calling it virtue. You have to call it what it is. And then decide what to do about it. I didn't wake up one day suddenly knowing who I was. That's not how it works when you've spent years dissolving yourself into other people's needs. What I woke up with instead was a refusal, quiet, uncelebrated, but firm, to keep disappearing. The first thing I did wasn't dramatic. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't explain myself. I didn't draw lines in the sand or deliver speeches about boundaries. I simply paused. The next time someone asked for something, I didn't answer immediately. I felt the familiar urge to say yes rise in my chest, fast, automatic, rehearsed, and I let it sit there without obeying it. That pause felt wrong. Almost immoral. Like I was withholding oxygen. But in that silence, something unexpected happened. I heard myself. Not clearly. Not confidently. Just enough to recognize a voice I hadn't listened to in years. It said, "I'm tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. The kind that comes from being everywhere except inside your own life. Saying no didn't make me free. It made me terrified. I watched people adjust, some with understanding, some with confusion, some with disappointment they tried to hide politely. And for the first time, I didn't rush to repair that discomfort. I let it exist. That was the hardest part, because when you've lived as emotional infrastructure, your absence feels like collapse even when it isn't. You're trained to believe that if you stop holding everything together, something terrible will happen. Most of the time, it doesn't. Things bend. People adapt. Life reconfigures itself. And the world doesn't end. What did end was a certain illusion, the belief that my worth depended on how much of myself I could give away without complaint. I began to experience something unfamiliar, emptiness that wasn't a threat. At first, it scared me. Without constant usefulness, there was space. Silence. Uncertainty. But that space wasn't punishment. It was room. Room to notice what I liked instead of what I tolerated. Room to feel resentment without turning it inward. Room to discover that I had preferences, clumsy, underdeveloped ones that had been waiting quietly for years. I once pretended it was empowering. It was awkward. Lonely. Uneven. Some relationships shifted. Some thinned out. A few existed only because I had made myself indispensable, and without that, there was nothing left to connect us. That hurt. But it hurt honestly. And honest pain heals differently than quiet self-erasure ever could. The strangest change was this: I started feeling time again. Not as pressure. Not as obligation. But as something that belonged to me. My days felt heavier but also more real. Like they had texture instead of just function. I learned that being needed and being known are not the same thing. That love which requires you to disappear isn't love, it's convenience. And that living for everyone else doesn't make you selfless forever. Eventually, it makes you invisible. I don't live perfectly now. I still slip into old patterns. I still feel the pull to overextend, to prove my value through effort instead of presence. But now, when I feel myself fading, I stop. I ask one question, the one I avoided for most of my life: if no one needed me right now, would I still know who I am? That question doesn't shame me. It brings me back. If you're listening to this and something in you feels familiar, the exhaustion, the quiet resentment, the sense that your life is full but somehow not yours, I want to say this gently, without urgency or judgment: you are allowed to exist without being useful. You are allowed to take up space without earning it. You are allowed to live a life that doesn't revolve around holding everything together. I lived for everyone else and forgot myself. Remembering didn't happen all at once. But it happened the moment I stopped mistaking self-erasure for kindness. And finally chose to stay.